I could use pod.
Good afternoon. How are you, Kirk?
You know, I thought I should ask ChatGPT how I'm doing.
Oh, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good.
What would I say? I would say, what would you estimate, because it has to be an estimate, regarding how well Kirk is doing today. There you go. So let's see what it says. Oh, it wants to know which Kirk. Kirk from Star Trek. Kirk Durston. Okay. Let's try that one. Okay. Oh, that's a tough one. Oh.
It doesn't know.
Oh man, it's yeah, that doesn't tell me how well we're doing.
Well, I asked Grok on X. It says you're doing quite well, engaging actively with others on various topics and sharing your thoughts humorously and insightfully. Keep up the good work.
Is that you? That's you, eh?
That I asked Grok, and that's what it read all of my X's or tweets or whatever they're called now, and it's yeah, very encouraging. Very encouraging.
Okay, well, maybe I was too complicated. So I just asked, how am I doing? And then it's giving me this thing. It says, that depends. If you just want a casual check-in.
It's so much work. And so much
You know, I have noticed, though, that since I started paying for a subscription, $20 US per month, it's giving me a more detailed answers, let's put it that way. And maybe holding its cards closer to its chest, wanting more data, that sort of thing, which is a good thing, I think.
Mama Kay is saying that she can't hear me, so
Oh,
how's that? Is that any better?
I was hearing an echo just before you said that.
I realized my speakers were still on, so I turned off the speakers. So
Yeah, and there's no echo anymore, and I can hear you perfectly well.
all right, well, who knows what StreamYard's doing in behind the scenes? Because
Yeah.
let's see,
Let's see, comments.
audio.
Oh, she said your mic is quiet.
Okay, so here we go. I turned my mic volume up in the stream. We'll see
How's
if
that,
that's
Mama
better.
Kay? Can you hear better now?
More,
More,
please.
please.
I'm
You're-
quieter than Kirk. That's unusual.
105. Well, it is 105 right
I'll
now.
Boost mine up to 175. We'll see what happens there. I've got so many different volume controls happening all
I
at the
know.
same time here that
I got a box.
keep telling me, Mama Kay, how we're doing here, because I'm not sure. I'm hearing myself loud and clear, so it's StreamYard's doing something. Yeah, so Kirk and I, okay, perfect. And there's always a delay between the changes I make and when YouTube actually shows it. So, Kirk, why don't you get into a little bit why we're having this little ChatGPT Grok AI discussion here? We were talking about this yesterday in one of our team meetings, and we were talking about AI and stuff, and then you brought it up. So what were you doing with ChatGPT that got us all engaged in this?
Well, there's a couple of things recently. I thought I got into an argument one night just before going to bed. I think it was a week or two ago, a couple weeks ago, about dark matter. And I see in the news, I think it's yesterday or today, they want to change the name to invisible matter. Ooh. But anyways, and whether, how it's testable and so forth. And it turned out that in the end, it started off, ChatGPT was winning the argument, but then I started getting more specific
How
about
do you know if
falsification.
it's winning?
Well, because it gives me
like a little braggy.
It shows it shows no sign of backing down or giving in. It's just spewing out more info, responding to what I said with more info. But I then focused on the property of falsifiability and how do you directly falsify dark matter, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, it conceded that, yeah, you got a very important point here. Falsification is a key thing in this issue. We can't directly detect it, and one of the predictions ought to be, if it exists, there should be some way that we can build something that directly detects it, and I know that we are working on that. But more important, so I quit. I went to bed feeling at least we got a stalemate out of this one, and then I thought, this is ridiculous. In the old days, if I wanted to argue with somebody, I'd go online and pick some sort of comment section on something and get into a dust up there for half an hour or so till I was done arguing, and then that would be it. But now I'm arguing with nobody, essentially nobody. I'm just arguing with ChatGPT, and so I thought that was rather interesting and silly.
Is it nobody, Kirk, or is it everybody?
Well, you see, the problem is that not everybody is conscious that I'm over here arguing with ChatGPT. And in a normal argument, at least one person is aware, but ChatGPT is not aware of anything, although we could explore that. But then more recently, last week, I wanted to know who resided at 1221 at some address in Toronto in 1935 that had the street number 1221, because one of my relatives, close relatives, lived there at the time, and I don't know who he is. So it ended up giving me a bunch, but I said, okay, so it gave me some streets to look at, and I said, so what resided at 1221 St. Clair? And it said St. Clair Radio and Electric. Well, what about 1221 Queen? That was Queen Street, it was Queen Radio and Electric. And then I got suspicious. So I said the third time, what about Drummond Street? What was at 1221 Drummond Street? And it said, oh, that was Drummond Radio and Electric back in 1935. And so I said,
well, back then, radio and electric was a very important thing. So every street needed their own. Maybe,
but I said the probability that 1221 at all three streets has mostly the same name except for the streets changed, is extremely low. I think you're making stuff up. I told it right to its face, you're making stuff up. And then it really backed down, and it says, well, okay, I apologize, I've been giving you inaccurate information, and it sort of, I don't know, danced around a little bit and basically
admitted. Did you ask for a refund, Kirk?
Well, I think this just is one aspect that when we're working with these things, we have to have a half an idea what sort of an answer is a reasonable or a likely answer, and when it's likely to be not giving you good info. And so that's where I think our discussion this week was, a lot of it was on how do you tell if it's giving you good info. So one of the things it does seem to do is when I'm working on something, I'll ask for, okay, I'd like some sources, some references for this particular point. It'll then give me some, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're good to go, because some people have told me that it makes up its own references and peer-reviewed journal article, whatever. So you actually have to check those out. And I have not run into that yet. We're making up sources, so I've checked out quite a lot of sources on different topics. And it always provides a link, and so I go there, and yeah, I recognize some of these sources. Maybe some people have heard of Encyclopedia Britannica, some science journals, PLOS One or whatever, so you can actually read that, download it. So some people might say, well, before you got there, ChatGPT made up an entire paper on this and then put it on the website, and you got to check the URL there to make sure this is a legit website. Well, you can tell that by looking at the website itself. But the day that AI starts making up imaginary papers and inserting them onto legit websites like nature.com, for example, one of the more prestigious science journals in the world, then we'll have a huge problem.
So, like, I can see this happening where somebody programs a computer to take information from ChatGPT, write a journal, submit it, and then see what happens in the peer review process. Because we know over time, or you go back 3-4 years, there were peer-reviewed articles that weren't actually being peer-reviewed, but it said they were. And so there was some issues with some of those supposedly you can trust me journals about that, but
Well, yeah.
I'm hoping they've cleaned up their act a little bit so we can actually start trusting even the peer review process.
Yeah, well, there's problems with, I'll just hold that thought for a minute. With regard to journals out there, there are a lot of junk journals, and I regularly get requests to publish papers in such and such a journal. And when I want to publish a paper, I will choose my own journals, and I'll try and choose some of the ones with a higher impact factor, legit journals, legit publishers, that sort of thing. Because if I published a paper on one of those, I mean, they present themselves as journals, and we're not talking about journals made up by AI here. We're talking about people with basically junk journals, and I think they must charge. I don't know. I've never looked into it. They must charge to have your paper published there, and it's just a way to make money running a bogus journal. So there's that out there. Peer review is a different thing, even for legit journals. For example, I occasionally will get some legit journal sending me a paper, asking me to review it. And if that's not in my field, I don't have a lot of time here. I'm not going to review papers that I don't know much about, so I'll just respond accordingly. But if it is something that I know about, there's a problem, and the problem is I can read the paper, I can look for maybe weak areas or things that are unpersuasive or maybe really good points, but I usually don't have the time to reproduce the experiment that they did. And this has led to a huge problem in peer-reviewed science papers, particularly in biology, cancer research, and so forth. Pharmaceutical research is another major one where, on average, over 80% of the papers published in legit journals that are peer-reviewed cannot be reproduced. So, I mean, I could ask ChatGPT right now, see what it says about it. See, is what do you call it? Reproducibility. Make sure I spell that right. Although you don't actually have to spell it right. It
Are you
usually
sharing
knows
that screen? Are you like?
That's the same. Yeah, that screen is there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Problem in science. Wait a sec. That's so small I can hardly read it on my screen. So there's the question. I got to make this a little bit bigger here. So now it's thinking about it, and yes, okay. Yeah, reproducibility crisis. Yeah, and it's not just in science journals, but it's in psychology journals as well. Now, I know that some psychologists will say that's science, and some of it is science, some of it's not. So it is cancer research.
What was the question you asked there again? Is reproducibility?
a problem. That is, when somebody says studies show this or that, basically that doesn't mean anything nowadays, because you can appeal to studies that are actually published in peer-reviewed journals, and you might have a 60% chance of that so-called study, there's a problem with it. It can't be reproduced. And most of the time it has to do with statistical, let's say, cooking the books on your statistical analysis, poor sampling, whatever, massaging the data, getting rid of stuff that's inconvenient. And this is Nature has a couple of big articles on this problem. And in 2017, they said this is the norm, that science papers in certain areas like biology, cancer research, pharmaceutical studies, it's the norm that they can't be reproduced. What that means is that over 50%, well over 50%, have, I won't want to say bogus, but pretty much bogus. That is, you can't reproduce these papers. There may have been a legit experiment done. It didn't give the results they wanted, so they started massaging the data, cooking the stat analysis, and so forth.
So in Grok, it tells me very similar things. Reproducibility in science has indeed become a significant issue. And it gives me a definition, what the crisis is, some of the reasons, efforts to reduce. So we haven't tricked it yet, or we haven't gotten any bad information out of Grok yet. What was the thing that you asked the other day? Something about dark.
Oh, you mean who resided at 1221 St. Clair Avenue?
The dark matter one.
Oh, well, you see, the problem with that is it gets technical. I wanted to know if the failure to directly detect dark matter falsifies the hypothesis that there is dark matter. That was, I think, how I started the question. No, and it said no. And then it says, because, we're observing the galactic arms, the galaxies aren't, basically the motion of the galactic arms, they're not, for the speed that they're going right now, they should be flinging faster outwards, but something is holding these galactic arms basically reasonably stable. And so there must be a lot of matter that exerts extra. The matter has a gravitational field associated with it. The more matter you have, the stronger the field. So we only have, I don't know what's off the top of my head, I think it's 80% of the matter in a galaxy seems to be missing. Now let's do that. Let's see, what percentage of matter, is dark matter? Oh, matter. Okay, what percentage of matter is dark matter? 85. 85% of the matter in the universe is missing. And if you have a theory of how the universe works and gravity works, but you're short that much, it's 85% missing, then I think there's a problem with the theory. Now, the initial thought was that, well, it's out there, this dark matter is out there, we just don't see it. Dark energy, ordinary, what is that? According to cosmological observations, dark energy, 68 of the universe. Dark matter is 27% of the universe.
I'm getting the same thing in Grok, basically. Grok goes to a 0.1%, so it says dark matter accounts for 84.5, and dark matter is approximately 26.8 of the energy, and baryonic matter is about 4.9% of the total mass energy content of the universe.
Well, anyways, so scientists want to detect this. Have we directly detected dark matter? Have we directly detected dark matter? No, has not been directly. So basically, how do we justify believing in dark matter? And it's that our observations of galaxies in the universe, yeah, galaxy rotation curves, our observations suggest something is holding these galaxies together. They should fly apart if all the matter that's there is just what we can see visibly, you know. So there must be some unseen dark matter. Now, just the other day, today or yesterday, they're recommending we call it invisible matter. Invisible matter is one step back from dark. Dark, just read their little explanation. Let me see if I can get it half accurate at least. Dark matter suggests that it's out there, but it's not. It's absorbing light or something. It's not reflecting, and it says that's actually not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something that is even, well, it's really difficult to detect. It's like a dragon in the garage. Carl, I think, was it Carl Sagan? No, it was Richard Dawkins, I think, or Carl Sagan talked about this invisible dragon in the garage. And now you can see part of the problem here is in science there's a problem with pattern fitting. That is, you know that you observe something, so what you do is you come up with a theory that explains that thing post hoc after you've observed it. Then, of course, you go out and see if you can detect it. And all our efforts to detect it so far have failed. Now, I think the latest effort is the best yet at possibly doing this. And if this one fails, then we're going to have a problem. Now, the other option is to rethink our theory of gravity, that somehow it's more complicated than what we anticipated, that we're basically seeing most of the matter, but yet the gravitational aspect of all that matter might be different for some reason than what we anticipated. On a large scale, maybe scale of galaxies or something, the way the gravity works. Don't ask me to figure out how that works. I just laughed here. I looked at Deep Burrito here.
Yeah.
Great question, Deep Burrito. More insight and power than God. Okay, well.
Yeah. And then he followed it up with, have we detected God? Answer, no.
Well, I would say that we detect God. Now, this is just off the top of my head here, so I'm pulling an answer to my back pocket here, Deep Burrito. But I would say we detect God in the same way we detect dark matter. We see the effects of dark matter, and in this case, we see the effects of the existence of some mind behind the universe, and that's, you know, all of that is a huge topic in and of itself. So we would do it in the way that forensic science works, where forensic science works with the effects. Well, here's the effects. What could possibly have done this? Are there fingerprints here? For example, we could ask that. Are there any fingerprints of God in the universe? Why don't I ask ChatGPT?
I asked Grok, where does dark matter come from?
That'll make it think there for a little bit. Where does dark matter come from?
Yeah, so it's telling me one, Big Bang Theory. There are some leading ideas of where it might have come from. Big Bang Theory, so thermal relics from that. Cosmological inflation. And then particle physics beyond the standard model. This is way outside my ability to comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
Non-standard models, modified gravity theories, dark sector. Could be an entire dark sector of particles and forces.
Okay.
And cosmic string networks. So hypothetical one-dimensional topological defects left over from the early universe. It could have fragmented into dark matter particles. But if it's 85% of the universe, how does that work?
Yeah, well, that's a big deal. We could just say in layman's language, this is a big deal about dark matter. And I guess you saw its answer to, are there any fingerprints of God in the universe? And ChatGPT gives me a balanced answer. I
So
say
let's
yes
go
and
into
no.
those questions that it says under no. So science can explain these phenomena without invoking God, though some questions remain.
Yeah, well, okay. I think if you go back to, they may actually, examples of fine tuning. Counter argument, yeah. So counter argument would be the counter to the fine tuning argument. So this is where they would say science can explain that by invoking a multiverse,
Yep.
and that has
We've talked about that.
we've
before.
talked about that,
All
and
it
science
does
is pretty
it
much
backs it up. It backs
well,
up
it's
the
been
question.
debunked. Been
Where's
debunked
the
in
multiverse coming from?
yeah. That's the problem, and I have an article on my website I should mention that I talk about that, and in that article I have some references. So it's one thing to watch two guys here on live stream say it's debunked or it's been regarded as not science or even a threat to science. So I really do need to provide references for that, and that you can find some of those references in my article. What would that article be? Something about the multiverse. No, science and fantasy. Look for my article that talks about the fantasy in science, and that'll have the references.
So I asked Grok, can nature create itself?
Oh yeah.
And so it says, well, it can create itself, touches on deep philosophical, scientific, and cosmological issues. Here are some perspectives. One, Big Bang Theory. Universe began with a singularity approximately 14 billion years ago. From this, all matter, energy, space, and time emerged. However, this doesn't fully answer how the singularity itself came to be. So it could have been quantum fluctuations in a pre-existing void. But
Yeah.
what created the void?
Yeah, it's still really, as chat points out, pre-existing.
Multiverse. And then loop quantum cosmology. But again, it doesn't really... It's just backing up the problem one step, right?
It does back it up. Now, the cyclic problem, that loop quantum cosmology, where is that here? Yeah, it suggests a cyclic model where the universe undergoes cycles of contraction and expansion, potentially self-sustaining but necessarily creating itself from nothing. So I would like to ask it a question there. If we're at some point in some cycle whatever, cycle X, have we actually, in reality, traversed through an infinite number of previous cycles? I already know the answer to that, but from math, but...
Okay, so if we're at a cycle in loop quantum... So if we were at cycle X...
We're at cycle X.
We were at cycle X in loop quantum cosmology. Does that mean... What's the question here? Does that mean...
We have actually, or sorry, you could put, say, physical reality or something like that. We could mean physical reality has actually proceeded through an infinite number of cycles in the past. And colon, semicolon, and then say emphasis on the word actually. Because mathematical models, no problem.
Has proceeded through
An infinite number of cycles in the past. And we want emphasis on the word actually.
There?
I guess. Let's see what it does with that. Yeah, it gives a little seminar on what that is. Finite number of cycles. No beginning at WISEC here. If we consider cycle X, finite number of cycles, possibly first cycle, initial state. Yeah. However, how this first cycle started, you've just pushed the thing back. But what about infinite cycles? with no beginning, an infinite regress. This is maybe physical reality has indeed proceeded through an infinite amount of cycles in the past. However, this faces philosophical and physical. Well, I would say the biggest challenge is mathematical, because if you have to count down through a countable, actual infinite number of things, and you have to do it one at a time, you can't do it, because there's a property of an actual countable infinite, which is what we would have in the past if you want to hypothesize an actual infinite number of cycles as opposed to just treating that whole past as a mathematical object. That's not the way things work in physical reality. So if you have if you have a countable number, the cardinality of a countable infinite set does not change as you remove one cycle at a time from it. It stays at, and the cardinality is usually represented by a symbol called Aleph subscript null. So you never, ever get to X, cycle X. No matter how, there's no starting point either, which is a bit of a problem, but you never get to cycle X. Mathematically, yeah, you can make models that work, but the problem is transferring them to reality where you can't treat the past as a mathematical object. Instead, you have to literally deal with this problem of one cycle following another cycle. And let's say if each cycle lasts, I don't know, 10 to the 120 billion years, even if each cycle only lasted 1 second, you would never make any progress in getting to this cycle right here. But I think we probably lose a lot of people. I find whenever I start talking about countable infinite sets, cardinalities, and traversing an actual infinite, people lapse into unconsciousness.
Yes. So I just asked, like, is infinite cycles within the loop of quantum cosmology possible using existing mathematical laws? And it does say they do not rule out the possibility of infinite cycles, but there are significant theoretical challenges and unresolved questions regarding entropy, time, and
exactly.
So
like I said,
Grok's been pretty good.
Yeah, it is pretty good. I'm impressed. And so this is where the clarification I made is important here. Mm-hmm. It is possible mathematically to construct a mathematical model where you have an infinite number of cycles and you arbitrarily point X. Like we work with infinity all the time. So let's say when we're integrating from minus infinity to 5 or minus infinity to plus infinity. We do it all the time. But it did point out here that there are problems, and the problem, one of them mentions is time. How does time work, and how much time do you require at each discrete interval? That's the problem. And then you start having to work through that infinite number one at a time. So mathematically, no issue at all postulating a universe that's infinitely old in terms of years or in terms of cycles, mathematically. But in reality, then you have a major problem. I think they say significant theoretical work is needed. That's bafflegab for we don't know. It's probably not going to happen. In fact, yeah, bafflegab, by the way, is when you use technical language.
Speculative extensions or reinterpretations of these laws.
So what qualifies as science and what qualifies as science fiction? You got to make that distinction here. So science, you should be working with things that are predictable or at least reproducible. You should be able to do some experiment, testable, falsifiable. But if you can't do any of that, which we can't do here, and you have a major mathematical problem when you transfer the mathematical model into reality, where you have to traverse each cycle one at a time or whatever, that's when your theory moves into science fiction. And you can write science fiction using human languages, but you can also write science fiction using mathematics. And the mistake some people make is assuming that this mathematical model, because we said the word mathematical and we used math in it, that therefore this is scientific. No, it's science fiction. It's describing something mathematically that in physical reality is not possible. Of course, it does dodge and weave around here with saying we need to reinterpret and whatever. Significant theoretical problems. You can throw in words like that.
Well, it's
I
hedging. It's hedging, right? It's
Yeah.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
we don't have answers, but we'll probably find them someday.
And I gotta hand it to the AI thing here. I gotta hand it to because it's learning how to use baffle gab. It's using how to dodge and weave and work around its way around the bush. But in answer to Deep Bruder's initial question, have we detected God? Well, I think ChatGPT, that answer we showed there, showed that, if we're just looking for the fingerprints of God, they're all over the place. And then the argument then heads over to the individual, what are these fingerprints? Because I will say this emphatically, I don't claim to prove anything. I can, make mathematical proofs where you're just working, like, say, with something as logically necessary. But in real life, we just talk about probabilities. Is this more likely than that? What's your rational justification for this versus that? And so sometimes you can't even put numbers when you're figuring out probabilities.
So Mama K's asking the same question: is the probability higher for the existence
ask
of God
that.
or against?
Did you ask that?
I haven't asked that yet. I wanted to point out this because I asked the question, where did nature come from? And it basically gave the same things it's always been saying here, but in conclusion, while science provides a narrative for how our universe might have come into being, the ultimate origin of nature, whether it's our universe or all of existence, remains a profound mystery.
Profound mystery. You know what I look for in science when I'm reading a paper? I look for what I call lack of data words. You can put lack of data in scare quotes. That's when you don't know something, so you use words like might have, possibly, narrative, profound mystery. The best one of all that takes the cake was one I saw in a paper talking about the origin of life. They had more than 24 lack of data words in there, but the best one of all was, what was it? It's logically possible. Logically possible? Wow, like that really opens up the scope to creative speculation. There's a ton of things that are logically possible. It's logically possible that a bucket full of gold nuggets could fall from the sky through the roof of my house and land on the floor behind me. That's logically possible. There's nothing.
It just takes a Boeing plane full of gold buckets, because those doors just open on their own. So you never know.
Yeah. Well, you never know. My truck actually got hit once on a trip by something falling out of the sky.
Oh, nice.
There was nothing above me, no planes.
No.
I stopped, and it carved a furrow in the side of my truck as it ricocheted. And you could see from the angle of the furrow, it had come from about not a 90-degree straight down, but an angle about like this. And it was about this big. Could have been a little meteorite, but it literally didn't just chip the paint. It literally left grooves. It carved a furrow and left grooves in the sheet metal of my truck.
Nice.
So you never know. Taking a walk outside could be bad for your health. It's logically possible you could get nailed by a meteorite and be off to the pearly gates. So what about that question? I tried to copy paste. How do we? It just disappears.
I'm asking: is the probability that nature began through intelligent design or the Big Bang? Or is the probability higher? Well, I guess it's already comparing. It already knows what I was thinking. It didn't even need my question.
Yeah.
A wealth of observational evidence, including...
Well, it's pretty hard to talk about the origin of nature without having something you could describe as a Big Bang. Like, I'm not sure. Let's say if God said, let there be a universe. Boom.
Boom.
What would that look like in retrospect as you look backwards? I mean, you could well see exactly the same thing we're seeing today. An expanding universe, red shifting of galaxies, whatever proportion of light elements. Like, it doesn't really... What you need is a prediction that falsifies one hypothesis while at least verifying or allowing that other hypothesis to see the light of another day, so to speak. So I might ask,
So it's interesting though. It's saying the fine tuning arguments there. Then it goes into probability. Calculating a probability for intelligence design is not straightforward, since it's not based on empirical science in the same way. ID does not provide testable predictions.
well, that's false.
It often relies on philosophical interpretations of complexity, order, and purpose in nature.
Yeah.
And it's subjective rather than empirical measurement. So when you compare intelligent design, the odds and probabilities with Big Bang or with the guessing that's happening right now, the theories, what are the evidences that they are saying the Big Bang is coming at that are actually testable?
Well, one is the cosmic background radiation, which they appeal to, but I've read some other papers more recently that have that explain that cosmic background radiation, and these are peer-reviewed papers out of some journal. I bet ChatGPT or Grok will supply them. There's another one though, and that's the inflationary period of the Big Bang. The problem is the more or less uniform distribution of matter to keep it from clumping early on in the universe and then it just collapse. So there should be gravitational waves produced during during the inflationary phase. And thus far, we've built very sophisticated gravity wave detectors, and we can actually detect colliding neutron stars, for example, or black holes, as they send those gravitational ripples out through space. So they're that sensitive, but we still have not been able to detect the massive kind of gravity waves from the inflationary period. So some scientists are saying, well, okay, that was a prediction. That falsifies at least the inflationary theory in the Big Bang. But without the inflationary theory, we have a huge problem, because we shouldn't have a universe like this at all. It'll just collapse very quickly. The matter will clump too fast. You won't get this nice distribution, stars and galaxies. You know, on a related note, before I forget, it said, I wanted to argue with your Grok over there, because it said there's no, how was it? It's not, ID is not testable. No, it makes no predictions. I think that was what it was.
Well, here it says it's not within the realm of scientific probability.
Okay, so here's a question I asked ChatGPT. I said, does the design of a laptop computer require intelligent design? And it said yes, the design, etc., etc. And then it gave me 4 reasons. And the interesting thing is, the first one is highly integrated systems. We see exactly that in living organisms. It's like molecular machines that have to be in place before that thing can even function as a living organism. So it can't necessarily, it has to co-evolve the need and the supply at the same time. We see so many highly integrated systems. I read one paper in Nature that says we may never fully, let's use the word reverse engineer how the cell works. It's just phenomenal. It makes a laptop computer look like something a chimpanzee built in 3 minutes. The second reason it says that laptop computers require intelligent design is functional interdependence, where the parts must be precisely arranged to work. Well, again, in biological life, this is the norm. It's without that, it wouldn't work. Without this functional interdependence. Third is a clear purpose, and they suggest processing information, running applications, communications, etc. And there again, let's take DNA for example. We have the information that you need to produce the different kinds of proteins to build the molecular machines. All that information is encoded in DNA for a purpose. It's not just sitting there, random bits of information. It's got a clear purpose, and you say, well, where did the machine come from? All the different proteins that we needed to assemble this, not we, but the cell needed. You have encoded information again, such as computer code and circuit design. Another paper in Nature said, basically, we have molecular computers built into the cell that turn genes off and on depending on the kind of inputs they're getting. And also, Craig Venter, who decoded the human genome, said it's time for biology to start talking about the information in DNA as computer code. We have, so when you look at its 4 reasons or 4 identifiers or 4 fingerprints or markers for intelligent design for a laptop, all of those are present in biological life, and to a much greater degree than what we see in something so barbaric and crude, relatively speaking, as a laptop computer. So simple and crude compared to the cell. We have thousands of scientists all over the world working on gene regulation, figuring out how the cell works, molecular computers, how these things get built and are there at the right time. We're making progress, but the question is what the percentage that we know compared to what there is to know, and that's the big question.
Here's a good one. Scum of the earth. I don't know, is that aspirational, that name, or is it you've already reached?
Well, I kind of like those names. I used to play back in my online gaming days, what was it, Halo, and my name was the Clown. I called myself the Clown because I like people to underestimate me.
Well, there you go. Here's another one. Kirk Durson, more like Kirk Worston.
Yeah. Well, that's not as bad as the Clown, but Scum of the Earth actually asks a very good question. Very good.
Well, I think it's to hold the Earth down.
Well, okay, but there is actually a scientific way to test to see if rocks qualify or if they have the marker of requiring intelligence to produce. So it goes to something called functional information. So if you said, give me a peer-reviewed paper discussing FI, functional information, it'll probably provide you a few. I have worked with some of those papers. One is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. I've published a couple of papers using functional information, but the beauty of that is that at the heart of the functional information is a ratio of functional to total possible configurations. So the smaller that ratio is, like the fewer, let's say you want to break into a bank vault and nobody tells you the combination, well, you have a lot of possibilities there. And there's only one combination that will actually open it. Now, if it's a cheap one, you might have some slop in the numbers. You might have 9 or 27 different combinations, all in a very narrow window that'll open. So you put 27 over the total number of possible ones, and you plug that into the equation for functional information. And I have that here, because I just asked that question earlier. And it'll give you a number, and that's how much information is required to solve that problem of breaking into the safe. Now, when you look at a rock, you say, well, what is its function? I look at rocks out there, and basically any shape will do. So the ratio is actually very close to 1. And when you have the natural law, the actual equation for functional information is very close to 1. When you plug that in, it requires 0 information to produce a random rock. There's no laws of nature dictating this. There's nothing. It's just any shape will do. So is a rock intelligent design for a purpose? A priori, you just go out there, no. They're not, because the amount of information required to produce any random rock is 0. And one of the markers for intelligence is that it's capable of producing huge spikes in information or effects that require a huge amount of information. Let's take the DNA, the genomes of life, for example. So once the amount of information is higher than a cutoff threshold, and rocks fell well below that, you could say no intelligence required, any shape will do, we can just let stuff happen and you'll get rocks of any random shape.
I have a very practical reason for rock's existence. I have children, and when they were younger, pockets became rock holders,
Yeah.
and they got great joy from
Yeah.
carrying rocks.
Yeah, pretty
when
ones.
I go to a beach, and there's a body of water, and there's a rock, what do? You skip it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the shape is, although you are trying to go for the perfect shape, but it's how many times can you make it bounce? God loves fun.
Yeah, but I would even, like, I've thought about all of this stuff. I've thought about it for years. And what about these nice, beautiful, round but flat? You want the pancake style of rock. A nice one about like this, quite flat, but rounded edges so it doesn't dig in the water.
Yep.
And what's the probability, because that's basically that ratio in there, that you'll get this? And it might be, depending on what sort of beach you're looking at. There's some beaches that the physical system simply will not produce those kinds of rocks because the rock type, let's say, is too soft or whatever, it's just crumbling away. But when you crunch the numbers, it actually turns out that nature is still capable, just natural processes, of producing large numbers or enough of these skipping rocks that very little information is required, almost none. The physical system will do that.
We're going on this rabbit trail of scum of the earth. So, a fascinating idea. How do you measure the amount of information in an object or form?
Yeah, well, I actually did. Let me scroll up for.
Way out of my my sports ministry degree. We never.
Okay, here it is. If you show my window here,
Yep, it's on.
there it is. So this is the functional information approach to measure the amount of information in an object or form. You have to know that it at least has a function. You don't have to know what the function is. For a lot of proteins, we still don't know what they actually do. But when we look at the genomes of life, we see that there's some universal genes, for example. We know that must be important. We don't know what it does, but it's got to be important. It has a function. So the next question is, if you look at this, we got ME. Let's look at N first. N is the total number of possibilities. Total number of possibilities for an object or form. Now, a real simple one is when you're working with digital information, like, for example, a bank combination or the digital information encoded DNA. Those are very simple to work with because you have a certain number of symbols. And once you know that number of symbols, let's say for DNA it's 4. And then, for proteins, there's 20 symbols. And let's say the average protein is 300 amino acids long. So it's basically N equals 20 raised to the 300th power. So that's a large number. But then we want to know ME, and ME is a little bit harder to figure out. There's a way to do it, and I published a paper, and you can see it on my website, peer-reviewed paper on how to estimate the functional complexity or the functional information of proteins. So you look at ME, and you take that number, and then you divide it by N, and then you take log to the base 2 because you want to get it in bits, minus, and that gives you the amount of information in bits. Now, if you're working with something trickier, where it's not digital, let's say the face is at Mount Rundle, then you'll have to look at that. You might want to look at symmetry. You still have to have some variables here that you're going to have to come up with some estimates for. So symmetry might be one. The smoothness of the topography versus all the other rocks.
The faces at Mount Rushmore?
Yeah.
Okay, you said Rundle. I was trying to figure out there.
Oh, sorry.
There's a Canadian version. It's about 2 feet high, and it's just Trudeau.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So there are ways
It's got
to.
Trudeau and Chrétien there. It's not a very popular place.
There are ways to actually estimate the functional information required for effects that are more complex, like things that aren't digital information. You have to sit down, you have to look at that effect, and you could say, okay, so why, let's say you landed at Mount Rushmore from outer space, you've never seen a human in your life, no tourists around, you look at that, and you say to your fellow alien, that's odd. And then, well, what's odd about it? And so, because you're scientists, hopefully, if you're flying interstellar spacecraft, you say, well, here's something odd. Look at the symmetry on those 4 examples of what we're looking at. So you got to come up with what are the variables. Then look at how smooth the sections are. You don't call them faces because you don't see no human. Look how smooth the sections are versus everything else we're seeing around us here. So gradually you come up with maybe 3 or 4 variables, and you come up with a probability of seeing that kind of symmetry in that area. So that would be the value for one variable. So that equation you're seeing there is actually a highly simplified version of Shannon. So do I have Shannon's more complex one just above here? No, they don't. So people are afraid of equations. So it's actually a sum where you could take each variable has its own sum and whatever. And that's what I do for proteins. And in the end, then you get an estimate as to how much information that required to build, even if you're a space alien, never seen a human, and you're on Mount Rushmore. Once you have that estimate, then you can turn to your fellow alien and you can say, does this cross the threshold where intelligence, above that threshold, intelligence is required? And that threshold is always a number in terms of bits. So how many bits do we estimate this required? Does the physical system is the physical system that we're observing here capable of producing that level of information, that number of bits? And there's a way to do it. And then you come up with a number.
I ran Mount Rushmore through Grok. Could Mount Rushmore have been created without intelligent design? Because it previously told me that a laptop could not be created from a single cell if given enough time.
Yeah.
Because it's not biological. Okay, so and it was pretty clear that it thinks that design is laptops intelligence design is needed, but again, going back, it was very clear that you don't need intelligent design for humanity or nature. So
well, Mount Rushmore face is quite a bit simpler than a human. So what did it say about Mount Rushmore?
So this is interesting. He said, as it currently exists with the carved faces of 4 U.S. presidents, could not have been created without intelligent design. Here's why: artistic design, scale and precision. Let's talk about the eyeball. Geological and physical considerations. So it's saying because it couldn't have been a natural, well, why not? Material. It's hard, durable rock. And then
well, that's really interesting because the faces of Mount Rushmore are like if you actually crunch the information numbers. I just a number of years ago, just for fun, I think I came up with 4 variables, and you get a significant amount of information required to produce something like Mount Rushmore. You need even more if you're trying to make it look like a particular person. But let's say you just want 4 human faces, and it's saying here that it does need intelligent design, and it's giving the reasons. But all of those reasons apply, and even more so when it comes to a human. See, I have a face. See, like that. If my face was on Mount Rushmore, I think you'd probably say you need intelligent design to produce that, as long as it's rock on a mountain. But if it's a thing that has billions of cells with millions of molecular machines all working simultaneously to do this and that, no, that doesn't require intelligent design. I hope you can see.
Read the conclusion.
Unequivocal example of intelligent design. Wow. Yeah, well, it's just too bad it doesn't connect the dots.
I'm going to ask it.
Yeah, why does a human face not require intelligence? That would be funny.
But a human. Intent.
Oh, so there was, it's kind of circular reasoning here if it's assuming there was no intent behind the design required to produce biological life. Yeah, it's
So
unlikely.
it talks about unlikelihood of natural formation. What's the likelihood of the Earth being exactly what's needed to sustain life? It's a
Well,
pretty big-
I actually asked it a question earlier on just for one protein coding gene, just for one. Like we have close to 20,000 protein coding genes, plus or minus, a human does. The simplest life form probably has, I've seen different papers with different numbers. I think, what was a 280 or something like that, different protein coding genes. So I said, well, what's the probability? How much information, actually, that was the question. How much information would I need for an average protein? And it did crunch the numbers. Let me see here. Final probability calculation. That was 64. That was the lower bound. That was the simplest protein you could possibly think of. There it is. The probability is 10 to the minus 20. Extremely low, meaning one would need approximately 10 to the 19 random trials. So,
Now, I
but
think reasonable is carrying a lot of weight there.
yeah, and it's vastly underestimating the information here because, I published a paper in Journal of Theoretical Biology and Medical Modeling, where I actually crunched some numbers for the average protein and above and low, higher and lower, and it's really underestimating the amount of information. And I use real data, so. And I work with arrays that might have, let's say, as many as 20,000 different sequences for a given protein family. So that's how many rows there are, and then maybe 1,000 columns. So that's what I work with, because that gives you the real data, and from that you're able to get a better estimate. And it's usually around 250 bits of information. 250 bits, not 64. So I said, okay, it said the higher FV values was 77, so it did it again. And so it's saying here, each trial required 1 year. Because, okay, you can get evolution happening, trial a lot of stuff if you're just working with bacteria. But once you're starting to work with life forms that basically reproduce every spring or once a year, things really slow down. And that's where most of the diversity of higher life forms are. So let's say, you just want to get one novel protein. Once you get, say, a fish, and that's all you have in the world, just a fish, but you're going to need a ton of new novel proteins. But it says just one. And let's give that really generous estimate that ChatGPT calculated at 77 bits. If each trial took 1 year, it says it would take that many years. That's a lot of years.
That's more than
Goes
a
on.
billion, I think, even.
Well, the age of the universe is this many years. Therefore, it's saying effectively impossible within any realistic cosmic time frame. That's for just one protein coding gene. Just one. To get
It's
life,
funny
you need.
because it's telling me that there's no way that human DNA needs an intelligence designer here. There's no external design. The complexity of DNA
I know.
and its ability to code for life
Well,
forms is the
keep in-
result. So-
Keep in mind, though, that a lot of these AI things, they look online and they repeat what they see.
Oh yeah, totally.
So, I mean, this is the reigning paradigm within evolutionary biology, and you'll see tons of papers. Now, you always have to look for lack of data words in them. The basic operations of natural selection stuff, that's true. You can observe that all the time. But all that does is give you variation within a particular life form. But to get, let's say, go from an amphibian to a fish to, let's say, a figure skater at the Olympic Games, you need a lot more protein coding genes, totally new novel ones. Bob McKay asked a good question.
We're past our time.
Oh, we got to quit.
Now,
Yeah.
but-
So, quick answer,
Let's
no.
answer this one because this is a good one.
Yeah. No, a quick answer is no, as long as the information is low enough. That's why I talk about a threshold. So if you take a bunch of alphabet characters in a box, dump them on the floor, you'll probably get the word ah, because it's one letter. So that requires no information whatsoever, but you could get a
Right,
two-letter
you wanna
word
line the
accidentally.
right side up.
Well, I mean, you're asking for a lot here, especially if you start getting to 3 and 4 letter words. But whatever the physical system is, you have to determine what is the threshold that we could naturally expect, maybe within reason, to get that function, whatever it is. Let's say a 2-letter word, a 3-letter word, a 4. Eventually, dropping boxes of alphabet characters on the floor, there is a cutoff. I would say, well, I just want to throw numbers out there. Let's say 50 bits. 50 bits is pretty low, but you will never in the history of the universe, with people dumping stuff, get a 50-bit word out of doing that. So it's, for every problem, you look at the physical system, what is the cutoff threshold where randomly and accidentally you could produce information, and how much would that be? So you get a probability number there, you throw that into that equation that you saw, and that'll give you a number, and that becomes your cutoff threshold. And then you can double that if you want. No, not double it, because bits they go up logarithmically, so you don't want to double it. That's a huge increase, but you can add a few more bits. So if it's so little information that you could accidentally get it, no, you don't need an intelligent mind. That is why a threshold, a cutoff threshold, is required, and biological life is massively beyond that threshold, far more than a laptop computer, which ChatGPT concedes is definitely an artifact of intelligent design.
All right. Well, this was a fun one. We will see you next week, I think. I think we're on for next week. And if you have ideas on what you would like us to talk about, any questions, throw them in the chat, throw them in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell, so that will not only notify you when we have new videos coming out, but it will help us get our stream out there on more people's algorithms, so that they can enjoy math and science and philosophy. And I'm going to go and take some aspirin because my brain is hurting now. All right. Thank you, Kirk, for doing this. Thank you, Grok and ChatGPT.
Yeah, thanks,
for
Chat.
hanging out. And
It does appreciate thanks, I asked it.
Oh, yeah, well,
Yep.
somebody coded that. Should we ask it if it requires an intelligent design?
Oh, we never asked that. Oh.
We'll
You can do it yourself. Yeah,
next
everybody can
week
do it.
with that one and laugh at it. Okay, talk to you later.
Okay, bye for now.
If I can figure out how to get this thing working.
I'm punching that question in as we speak.
Well, maybe we'll just, I'll throw this up here.
Yes, in a
Practical
sense. Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
it's hedging. It's totally like, I'm not
In a
going to let
practical
you get
sense.
away with this.
Yeah, I would then confront and say, what do you mean practical sense? Like,
All right, we'll talk to you later.
yeah.